Okay, so we're going to start with regard to relief printing and the matrices that you can use, the first of which and the most commonly used is silk cut lino. So it's a concrete grey colour on the front, and on the back it has a kind of Hessian, which you can kind of see there, and so it's quite a grey, steel grey colour. So that's silk cut lino. Comes in, you can buy it by the metre even, like comes in really large sheets, and it's normal for doing lino printing. So this is traditional lino. In addition to that, there are other types of lino like this one, which has like a blue side and a green side. It's been sort of carved into. So you can hypothetically carve on both sides of this one. It's a plastic, and unfortunately I'm not that mad on the plastic surface, but it's fairly easy to work into. It just doesn't kind of pull away quite as easily. There's another type here, which is another plastic one, and it's a very soft plastic. It's got a pattern on the back, and plastic on the front. Then there are ones like this, which is a speedball. This is speedball, and that's called Speed Cut Ezy, and it's a blue colour. I'm not mad on this one. I find it's a little bit furry. The edges are a bit furry. And then there's what we're using at the moment, which is this one, and this is called, I just kept this so you could see, this is called Ezy Carve. Ezy with a Z, of course. Ezy Carve. And this comes in A4, so these are A4 size, and you can get them by 30 by 30 centimetres as well. But I've just then gone and cut those down, speed cutting. Well, Susie did half of it, thank goodness, yesterday. So these are just cut down so that we can do little repeats. So this is great to start with because it's very soft, super, super soft. And does anyone recognise what else this kind of plastic would be used for? Maybe erasers.
Erasers?
Yeah, erasers, yes. So also used for erasers. So that's the matrix. Then we've got lino tools, and we've got a series of lino tools. You've got some a little bit like that are just a basic set of lino carving tools. Those ones are Mikador. That's another set, same sort of deal. They come in all sorts. This is a wood carving set, but quite similar to a lino set and could be used for lino, no problem. You can get larger sets like that have got a lot more options. And you can also get this style, which is quite good. These ones have inside the variety of tools sitting in there, and you're able just to swap them out by unscrewing that and slotting it in, which is quite handy. There's also this style, which again, same deal, you're able to loosen off, move it in and out. These are ergonomically quite comfortable to carve with, particularly if you're doing lino, not so much for this job, but if you're doing kind of lino cut. There's another sort which I quite like, which is this one. This is SD, which SD is ESSDEE, SD. And this is a bit of a mixture because this one is a brayer, which is a smoother that you use for lino. We'll talk about that later. But it's also a tool. So inside there we've got all the bits, and we're able to put that together.
What was that one called again, please, Tracy?
SD, so it's ESSDEE, SD, and then that becomes a tool. And you've got a little barren as well. So that's kind of quite a good little multi-purpose one. Saves you buying an additional bit. Yeah, so that gives you a bit of an idea of the sorts of tools that we can use. Now, next is the carving of the matrix. Now, what we're going to do is basically make really little simple carved stamps, effectively. So they're little stamp blocks that we're going to be able to then stamp using our ink. So this is quite non-traditional technique, but works really well. And it's not a perfect, it's by no means a perfect style. It's quite, you know, take it as it comes kind of thing. So you don't need to worry about, does it look really perfect and stuff. So we're using this, and what we're going to do first is some drawings, and it's really good because what we're going to do is we're going to look at repeat pattern, tessellated patterns, and how repeat patterns could potentially work, and what you're going to do to make those patterns repeat themselves. So these are some examples of mine from one of my sketchbooks. The key with these is, so in this case, that is the stamp there. And that stamp makes all these patterns. But it will make other patterns if you do it in a different direction. So you could make a stamp that was that big, but sometimes it's better to make a smaller stamp that does more stuff. And I think I've actually, this is a stamp that's been done to replicate, it goes that way, to replicate more or less that pattern. Can you see that? It's a bit hard to see in the light. So yeah, you can make all sorts of patterns, and they'll repeat in different ways depending on how you place them and how you then go and repeat them. So this is a more complex set of drawings, but equally you can do little drawings like you can see up the top here, where you can see I've done just some little simple drawings this morning, just figuring out a plan, and then I've drawn up a block ready to go, so I've got something to work on. I've just used grey lead pencil because I can erase it if it's wrong, and then I'm ready to go. Now, most important thing to be aware of when you're using lino tools is that they are very sharp. They're designed to be sharp, and it's not a big issue when you're working on a little block, but when you're working on a larger piece of lino, like say that, sometimes you've sort of got to hold this, and if you hold this with your arm up here, what's that? A very major artery. If you put this into that very major artery, you're going to have a big mess on your hands. You're going to have a lot of blood, and it's going to be spurting, and then you're going to die. So you don't want that to happen. So it's very important that you keep your hands back here, all right? So you're never ever working like that. Yep. Some printmakers wear a wrist guard, so leather wrist guard around there for safeguard. So it is actually really important. And you can also get a thing like this, which is called a bench hook. So this is just a really simple device. It's got a little lip on the bottom of it, so you can put that on the edge of the bench so it can't push beyond, and then you can put that there so that it's not going to slip. Yep. This is a different style, same thing, but it's a metal version. Vlad could probably go into production for these and make everyone bench hooks. They're not fancy, but same deal. That's just going on the edge of the bench, and then that's holding into place. It's exactly the same thing. So they're called bench hooks, and it's a good thing to have, because it's otherwise very messy to have a lot of blood everywhere.
That's what happened in year 8 one time.
Some
kid cut his whole finger off.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. Okay, so once you've made your design, now what the really good thing about this is have we given you 3 or 4?
5.
Okay, so you've got one that's a funny shape. That one that's a funny shape is there so that you can just use that as a sampler just to test carving. And then you've got 4 sides. So if you've got 4 blocks, you've got 8 sides, because you can make a pattern here and a pattern there. E.g. here, we've got a pattern here, and we've got a different pattern there. So it gives you lots of opportunities to play with lots of different patterns, which is fun. Okay, so when it comes to carving, you've got to make a decision as to what you're going to carve out and what you're going to leave. So whether you're going to carve out the black or whether you're going to carve out the white areas. I'm going to carve the white areas. Now, the critical thing with doing this is that you are always carving away from yourself. So as I carve, I'm always working away. So if I want to go to this one, I'm going to turn it around. And I'm also spinning this around so that I'm always carving directly away from myself. Different tools will do different things, and you can experiment with those. Yeah, so you can see the beginning of that, of carving away. There are 2 basic ways that you can carve. One is that you can carve a lot away, and the other is you can carve a little bit away. So if you carve only a little bit away, you'll get lots of print. But if you carve a lot away, you'll get less colour because there's less to print. So let me see if I can find an example. So this one has got a lot carved away. So you can see the shiny bit there is all that's going to print is the edges of that little shell shape and the outside, as opposed to this one, which has very little carved away, which means all of this stuff's going to print. So there's a lot more that's going to print in that case compared to that one. Yep. It's really good to have a bit of scrap paper, newspaper, something like that down on your bench top. Newsprint is really good because it's really highly absorbent. So imagine I'd already carved that one away. And then you're able to use your ink. Now, I've mixed up ink here. Now, some of you yesterday had ink in all sorts of containers and stuff. If you can swap them out, like this is ideal, and you can get this sort of stuff at $2 shops really cheaply. But you know, something like that, the eyedropper is ideal because then you're just able to drop exactly the amount, and you don't need very much at all. So you can see I've only put 1 eyedropper of each of my colours on there. So I haven't put very much on there at all. The ink's being used pure, so I'm not diluting it down at all. And I'm just using this to loosely paint on. Now this is a very, quite a haphazard approach. I'm going to just print straight onto there. So sometimes it works really well, sometimes it's a bit dodgy, but it's really nice not to stress, but to just let it be. Now you can print more than one at a time, and then you get variations of fadedness, which can be quite nice too. Yeah, so now you can see that there's a pattern coming out of what didn't look like that pattern here, but then we're seeing that actually it turns into a series of daisies, which is quite lovely. I would do lots of experimenting in your diary, so in your visual journal. That's an ideal place to just build up lots of little samplers, and I'm going to run you through some basic samplers so you get a bit of an idea of some of the different things. Now, in addition to your journal, there's some just A4 photocopy paper, which is not very good quality. Then there's some nice heavyweight cartridge paper, which is sort of like that. Waiting for it to. I don't know if that's lagging. Can you see that? And that's quite thick, so you've got some of that, and that prints on really nicely. But the watercolour papers that I've given you print especially well. Like they print really, really nicely. And they're going to be, something that you save up until you've really got the hang of it, and you use those sort of toward the end. So I'm going to run you through some examples of different ones. So these are all just single colour basic prints of different patterns. There's the one that I just did. That one's going 4 ways, but you could do it in different sorts of ways. Likewise here, this one's done in the same way, but I could rotate it. I think I have actually. I've rotated it each time. I've rotated the stamp itself, like that way, and then that way, and then that way, and then that way, which is quite nice. Same with that one, I've rotated it. That one's been rotated. That one's just, as it comes. This one, you can see there's just a slight variation of colour. So what's happening with that is I've used one colour at the top and a second colour at the bottom, and I've sort of blended them together in the middle. And what that's going to give you is that sort of nice variation. So that's what you can see there with that one, where there's a little bit of red, a little bit of orange. There you can see I'm just playing around with placements. So in this case, you could go diagonally. I don't know where that one actually is. There. So, you could print diagonally like that. So prints like that all the way through. Or you could go around like that. You could print just straight that way. Or you could even do this way. What have I done? It's a good idea to clean your brush between, not do what I say, not what I do. So you could do, you could go this way. This way. This way, yeah. This way. So you could flip. And then you could do the same upside down ways if you wanted, or you could do it the same like this. That way. Oops, I did the wrong way around. You get what I mean? So you can flip them in all sorts of ways, any way that sort of takes your fancy, a la what you're seeing there. And you can build up, more complex, like full page patterns, and start to play with those as well. So that's your first most basic style. Once you've done that, you can start to do this sort of thing where you start to play around with multiples. So you can do tessellations where you're using separate, like this is 2 different stamps and 2 different colours. This one's 2 different stamps and 2 different colours. This one's, as I said before, that half-half. This one's 2 different stamps, 2 different colours, but one's just a tiny little stamp. And that can become quite interesting. Once you've done that sort of thing, you can then start to hand colour. So with these ones, you can take one that you've done previously, and you can come back in and just physically hand colour. And the good thing with the ink is once that's completely dry, it's not going to bleed at all. So you're not going to get any bleeding of one ink area or colour to another. And I'm quite rough with this. I'm not being really pedantic about staying inside the lines. I'm using a ridiculous brush that's sort of all wrong for it, but that's fine because I'm not fussed about it being really perfect. And I think it actually in some ways works better when it's not really perfect. You could use watered down colour for this. And the colours that you choose is going to cause different patterns to start to form as well, which can be quite interesting. So if we have a look at some examples of the hand coloured stuff, this and this are the same pattern. This is the same pattern. I'll see if I can find another one. And this is the same pattern. And this is the same pattern. So all three of those are the same pattern, but they're just coloured differently and placed differently. So how you place them, these ones are on the diagonal, this is on the square, and it completely changes the vibe and completely changes the overall kind of feel of the piece. And you could continue to work this up with particular colours. And you can come up with your own colour schemes as well, and they can be quite particular colour schemes. Like there, I'm watering that colour right down there, for example, which is fine to do. So you can build those sorts of more complex. And the more you start to think about how you can move your stamp around, the more interesting this sort of stuff becomes. This one's like kind of haphazardly coloured, so no real kind of rhyme or reason there. Little one. There's the little daisies, but in this case a stamp in the middle to give a sense of that yellow of the centre of the daisy. These ones, that's two of the same one there, but coloured differently and placed differently. There's the beginnings of a coloured one I've just not finished, and likewise there. So that's your hand coloured. So I'm going to get you to make sure that you have got a hand coloured one. You could get really fancy and you can do this kind of hand colouring as well. So pre-stamp, so that's actually hand coloured. So imagine you did this bit with that, and then the next bit with this, but it's getting a lot more complex. And so forth, and then you'd stamp. The other one, which I think is a lot of fun, is this one, and this is overlaying. So building complex layers and painting over the top to build up, really interesting, rich, detailed sorts of layers. So in this case, like in these three here, they've all been done. They're all the same stamp. But the stamp itself has been stamped. So there's the stamp. And the stamp itself has been stamped on in different ways. So one colour, the first I did that orangey yellow, and I stamped it all, say, that way. And then with the green, I turned it and I stamped it this way, and then that way, and then this way, and then that, So I swapped it around and built up a really rich layers. With this one, after doing that, I've actually painted into it. So I've just physically got the paint and physically just painted into it like that, which makes it really rich. And you can just keep doing that. Like once it's dry, I could add another layer here. I could get the stamp and do like a layer really dark blue, for instance, on here, and it'll become richer. So some other examples of those. So these are actually white paper, but I've just painted right over it. This one's several different stamps, so it's 3 or 4 different stamps stamped over. So if you've got one that you think, oh, I didn't really like it, it didn't work that well, you can just start to stamp over the top of that to build up other layers. You know, I could build on top of this one more layers, for example. So, so that gives you a lot more scope to pushing your ideas. Now, as far as, you know, what do you then do with these? You'll produce a whole lot of them, but they make really beautiful fronts of cards, so you could make them as, you know, gift tags, cards, things like that. Ex-students have produced these as actual gift cards, and what you would do then is you would make sure that the paper that you were using you'd made at the right scale to begin with, so that was going to work really well, you know, really well for them. Now, what you'll also notice, I should just do one on here. The other thing is when you do stuff on good quality paper, it really makes a difference. Really makes a difference to the quality of the actual print itself. So you can see, you know, that prints really nicely. On that quality, better quality paper. So you'll feel quite a substantial difference. So don't rush in and use that good paper at the start. Save it up. And as far as the stamp goes, you can come up with whatever takes your fancy. But you can't be terribly detailed because the stamps themselves just don't lend themselves to that. Just going to use this one. So I could then, it's not working very well because it's still wet, so it's just making a mess. I'll just do it anyway. I could wait for that to dry, but equally I could also come into that while it was still wet. And it's going to pull, because the ink hasn't dried, it's going to pull that ink out, which is kind of interesting in and of itself. I could add into that while it was wet. Generally, it's better. You're better off waiting till it's dry. Yeah, so you can see how you can quickly produce something that's really quite interesting, and then that might then have something really bold in the centre. You know, I might put something with a contrasting colour in the centre when that's dry. So there isn't a sort of a concrete how many pieces you need to do. I want you to explore. You're going to make at least make the 4 of one side. You know, one side of the 4, and it might be. I'd like you to make sure that you make one that's heavily carved and one that's lightly carved. And it's good. It's a good. It's a good thing to do that. With the same pattern. I had one tonight before I showed you one here. So it's kind of good to do. This is the same image. So it's the shell with lots of stamp and the shell with hardly any stamp. So I think it's really good to do one where you carve the reverse out. So you've got one with lots of negative space and one with hardly any. So do, you know, of the same thing. I think that's just a good thing to do. it's really good to think about how the pattern forms over time, because the pattern might not initially be apparent until you do it several times. So when you do sort of more complex ones, so don't necessarily think of it as I have to fit the whole pattern into the one thing like that. So if we look up here at this one here, can you see that one there? I could equally do one that instead of that was only that much. So imagine it was this, and it was this, and it was that. So that's that part of that portion. And then so that's going to end up becoming that pattern if I want it to, but it's going to come up in a different way, and I can push it in different ways to make that happen. So sometimes so that doesn't look in and of itself to be a very interesting pattern, but when you visualize it like this, you start to see what's going to happen when it repeats. Sorry, it's very hard to draw this repeat in a hurry, but we're getting the basic idea. Yeah, so that's obviously going to become a circle. And so forth. So the stamp itself can be relatively simple, but it will then become a more complex pattern. I hope that makes sense. So just a couple of things to remember. The ink doesn't really come off your fingers, so you're going to get quite mucky. It does stain your fingers. It'll stain anything. So remember, with when you're using the ink, you want to make sure that you've got an apron on, you've got something like, some newspaper or newsprint or something like that down on the surface. If you do get it on stuff, wash it straight away and it'll come off if you do that. So just be a little bit cautious of that. And all your rejects. So I've got a reject pile here. Remember that you can take a reject like that, and you can then and you can then work into it and over it when it's dry. So nothing really needs to be thrown out, because you can kind of make it work, and so forth. So that's kind of a really good thing to know, that it's not, it's not like, well, there it is, that's it, it didn't work and it's a dud. You don't need to chuck it out. And do play around with things going in different directions, because that works really well too. So I'm going to just stop this.